Hey everyone, and welcome to the studio. It's demo day and I am going to be painting a still life, and this week we're going to focus on flowers as a still life, and I chose sunflowers for my still life subject because I really love to paint sunflowers. But they're tricky sometimes. I really find that it's tricky with pastel to get the yellows as vibrant as you want. So I'm going to give you some tips for that. What I want to talk about before we get started is just a couple of ideas to help you with painting a still life. If you're making the transition from painting other subject matter like I am, because I mostly paint landscapes, there's some things that you can keep in mind. And now I'm going to go over these in a lesson that you'll get this week. There'll be a more complete lesson. But I just want to show you the board over here and talk about it for just a second before I start painting. I'm going to share with you this week the 5 things that you need to think about when you are doing a still life. You need to pick the stuff, what you're going to use, and you want things that go together, that relate somehow. And again, I'm going to expand on all this week. Actually, I'm going to expand on all of this stuff the whole month. Light it up. You've got to consider your lighting situation. Compose with success, and this is what I want to talk about today. Consider what you're going to do for your background, and then consider your color. All right, so here's what I want to talk about for today, because I'm going to have to compose this still life. I'm going to be working from a photo, but the 3 things that I keep in mind when I'm painting a landscape are the same 3 things that I keep in mind when I'm painting a still life. So it's very easy to say, okay, if I want a strong composition or a successful painting, what do I need to do? I need to create that visual journey. Remember, we talked about moving the eye through the painting. Where's the eye going to go? Orchestrating the eye movement. You need to do that even if you're painting a jar of flowers. You need to create some depth. You want it to look 3-dimensional on a flat surface, unless you're trying to go for an abstract. And you need visual harmony. That means your color harmony, your background needs to relate to your subject. In landscape, we talk about your sky having to relate to what's happening on the ground. In a still life, it's the background as it relates to the subject. So these are the things I'm going to be keeping in mind as I paint today. One thing I wanted to say, I thought of this when I was getting ready to do the video, and I just wrote it down as quickly as I can. Why still life? How is this going to help us to improve our skills? Number 1, still life doesn't move. Okay, so if you're painting it from real life, setting up a still life, it doesn't move. It allows you to play with your technique. So really, no matter what your level is with pastel, this is a helpful thing. If you're new to pastel, you want to understand how to get the right kind of marks. How do you get the fat marks versus the tiny marks versus the linear marks and that kind of thing. If you're advanced with pastel, how do you really finesse your mark making? How do you really, maybe you want to change it up, maybe you want to simplify, maybe you want to expand your mark making repertoire. If you're working with a still life, you don't have to worry about, a car coming to block your scene or trees blowing in the wind, that kind of thing. It doesn't move. That leads me to the next thing, and then I'm going to start the demo. Should you paint from a photo or should you paint from a real life still life setup? I'm going to paint for a photo for the videos, and that's just simply because it's easier for you guys to see. You can see the photo as I paint. If I had a still life setup, we'd have to be figuring out, picture in a picture, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be easier if I do a photo. And I paint 99% of the time from photos. However, if it is at all possible for you to go out and get a bunch of flowers, go to the grocery store, go to Costco has great sunflowers if you have one nearby. But if you can get some flowers, even if they're from your yard, and stick them in a vase of some sort and paint from life, you are going to get so much more out of this still life experience, because you're going to be able to see the colors more accurately, the shapes more accurately, everything. It's three-dimensional. The way you look at things in real life is really different from a photo. So I encourage you to get some flowers this week to play with, if at all possible. All right, so let's move on to the demo for today. Okay, I'm going to be working today on a square piece of Uart paper. I'm not sure what grit it is. Probably 400. 400. That's usually what I get. 400 or 500. I'm going to be working from this photo. This is a photo that I took. There will be some changes that I'm going to make. I like the way the flowers are arranged. I'm actually not going to change that. But I don't think I need the butcher block thing. And I certainly don't think I need the fence. And as a matter of fact, I have to really decide what I'm going to do with the background. Do I want to just make it a solid color? Do I want to suggest the fact that it's up against green? I don't know. It might be a little bit overwhelming with the green. So I'm going to play around with that and see what I'm going to do with the background. One thing that you can do when you're not sure of a background, that's when you do those quick response studies that we did last month. So if you were to do a very quick study, you would be able to kind of play with your options. All right, so when I am placing a still life, I know that I don't want a small thing in the middle, like here, like this, and have all this empty space around. That's boring. That's not going to be an interesting composition. If I can attach part of the subject to the edge, that's going to be a good way to expand the composition so that the eye says, oh, okay, there's much more to this. It's not contained in this small little area. So I'm going to first start off by putting in the table. It's on an angle in the photo, but that's not necessary that I have it at an angle. I know I want it slightly off center, so a lot of times what I'll do when I'm doing a drawing is I'll just make some tick marks to say, okay, this is how far I want it. I don't want the I want the base, I think it's a little picture is what it is. I want it to end here, here, and here would be the top of it. This is going to be the big flower. And here's one thing. I am not going to do a complete, full, detailed drawing of this scene. I'm only going to put in the big shapes. The reason why is because if I were to take time to draw this perfectly, like every petal, every leaf, oh, I do like this one big leaf over here. If I were to take time to draw it in detail, like as I was saying, every single petal, I would have a problem because I would want to copy exactly what I saw. And then what I would end up doing is the drawing would become precious, meaning I would end up coloring it in rather than painting. All right, now I'm going to be, so what am I trying to say as I'm trying to think and talk at the same time? What I'm trying to say is don't get too caught up in your drawing. Just lay out the big simple shapes, and that's really all you're going to need. Otherwise, you're gonna be too tight. And I want to be more expressive with this. So I've got this handle, and it's kind of at a strange angle, the point of view of it. So let's see if I can manage that. Okay. Now, the other issue, and that was on our list, is we have to consider the lighting. Where's the light coming from? And unfortunately, in this photo, it was actually backlit, right? The sun was setting. It was like very late afternoon. And so there's no light on the flowers themselves. They were backlit. But that's not going to be so interesting for this because I don't even see any shadows. I am going to take out my artistic license and make the executive decision on where the light is coming from. And then I need to be consistent with that light and shadow. So I'm going to, let's just say that the light is coming from the top left, which means the top, the left side of everything will be illuminated. And then what does that mean? Tripping over the dog right there on my feet. That means that the vase is going to be casting a shadow over to the right. Now, occasionally, if you don't have the lighting set up in your photo and you are going to invent the light, which I'm doing here, I put this little mark up here so that I remember to be consistent with the light and the shadow that I create. So you got to be careful of that. Alright, the next thing that I want to show you before I start painting is the pastels that I'm going to be using. So if you remember from the intro video that I did, I painted pears. I used colors by value. Alright, so I had the dark column, the middle dark, the middle light, and the light. And then I had these brighter greens. So it was basically choosing one color and 4 values of that color. So when I looked at this, I hadn't put it away, and I looked at my photo, I said, you know what, I can use all of these colors. The only thing I'm missing really would be those brighter, or the yellows and the yellow oranges for the petals. So why not just use this palette and just add some of these brighter yellows. So I've got some cool yellows, warm yellows, and orangey yellows. And I'll explain more about that as I get to it. Alright, now the next thing I have to decide is how am I going to block it in? What am I going to do for an underpainting? I think that I want to keep it simple today, and I'm going to just do a dry wash underpainting. So I'm going to go and grab a piece of pipe foam, and I'll be right back, and then we'll start. Okay, I'm going to be using these 4 hard pastels. These happen to be the Nupastels brand. And then I'm going to rub it in with a piece of foam insulation that I actually got in some package. So it feels dense. I think it's going to be good, but it's an experiment. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to block in all of the dark areas. So I squint at my scene, and what is the darkest areas? The centers of the flowers. I'm using a dark blue. Whenever you can connect your dark shapes, it's always a good idea. So if I can connect these darker areas on this right side of the flowers, that's good. It's also dark kind of at the edge of this vase, or it's really a picture, and at the bottom of the picture. And I'm going to actually expand the dark to include the shadow. Okay, so that's good. So those are the darks. The lightest values are going to be the actual picture itself. So I'm going to use a pale blue. I'm actually going to use a little bit of a darker, I lost my line there, where does this base end? It actually is one thing, you don't have to be perfect with your drawing, but when you're drawing the actual objects, like your plates and vases and things like that, those have to be a little bit more precise. We can get away with flowers that aren't perfect, but we have to be a little bit more precise with our vessels. And I'm going to be giving you some tips on painting those things in an upcoming post. There's a lighter blue in there. And I'm mixing hard with soft because this is just the first layer, the underpainting. Now, next I'm going to paint in some of the flowers, but I'm going to be using a reddish orange color for this. The reason why is I really want to make my yellows vibrant, so I want to give them a head start and incorporate some nice warm colors in the flowers. Also, you'll notice that these particular sunflowers are not just yellow. There's quite a bit of rusty oranges in there. And you'll also notice that I'm not painting individual petals at this point. I'm just making marks to suggest those petals. And I'm doing this because I don't want it to look like they're just cut out and pasted on. Now I'm going to take a little bit of purple and layer that on the dark areas that I've already established. Alright, so what is left? We've got some green leaves, so let's block those in. So if you're wondering how am I choosing these colors, that they're pretty much local colors, meaning that's the color that these things really are. Usually I like to choose colors that are not local color, but in this case I'm going with local color just to mix it up a little bit. One thing is I have a similar technique for everything I paint, but I don't always do the same thing. Alright, so there I added a brighter green. Now we have to consider the background. That means the table, and I'm gonna, oh, I see what I haven't, there we go. If you have this pastel dust, you don't ever want to blow on it. Blowing on it puts the pastel dust in the air that you breathe. If you can see the particles are heavy enough that they fall down. They're not in the air. You're not breathing them unless you blow on them and put them in the air. So that's why you just want to tap to get those particles to fall. Alright, what are we going to do about the background? Let me think. One thing that we can do is incorporate the complementary color of yellow, because we have a lot of yellow in here, and the complement of yellow is purple, violet, so we could have a purple back, certainly we could have the purple cloth. Would we want the purple to be in the background, or would we want to suggest the trees? And I really don't think I want to suggest the trees. I think the reason why is it'll be just too busy, too much going on. There's a lot going on with the flowers. So I'm going to just take a light value of the violet and use this for the background. Now remember, you have to sneak it in behind that handle. So what I've decided for the background is going to be just a simple color field, and it's going to be the complement of the dominant color, which is yellow. So I'm going to take this piece of insulation, need a smaller piece, and I'm going to rub it all in. And the reason why I want to rub it in is because I want to get rid of the all these little light bits and pieces that are coming through from the paper color. Now if this paper were already toned, or if it were a more of a neutral middle value color, I might not choose to rub it all in. Now one thing that I'm doing, I'm going to do it right now, and I will also try to remember, see this hard edge where the background, two background colors meet? If I were to leave that as a hard edge, it may be that the eye would go right to that, so I want to soften it. So I'm going to just take my pipe insulation foam and soften it. Remember, we want the flowers to be the star and not the background. Alright, so now I've got it all blocked in. So what I'm going to simply do is go in and use the pastels and start layering, beginning with the darks. So we'll start with this. It's supposed to be a dark blue, but I kind of think it's black. Why I think it's dark blue, I don't know. So let's just go with a dark gray down violet. I'm going to remind myself as I do this is I want to keep things painterly, you know, kind of expressive with my mark making. I don't want to get too fussy. So the way I can do that is I can start by using big flat areas of color first, and then gradually add the detail. I love the detailing in the centers of these flowers, but I'm going to wait till I get a little bit further. Now I have a dark green, so I'm going to put the dark green in the centers as well as in some of this foliage, some of the leaves. And one thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at the photo and I'm not copying it exactly. Same thing as if you were painting it from life, you would not necessarily have to paint the petals and the arrangement exactly as they are. Now I'm going to take the Terry Ludwig Super Dark, which is the eggplant color, and I'm going to go in on the center where I see it, where it's darker than anywhere else. So not the whole thing, but just around the edges and in the center, in the shadowed area. I'm also going to use it right at the edge of the picture where it touches the table. So you can see the difference when I added that, what I call super dark. So if I were to use that everywhere, it wouldn't have that impact. So you want to be a little bit more reserved with it. Alright, now I'm going to come in and put in some of the middle dark areas. So I'm going to take a middle dark blue and paint the darker portions of the picture. And I have to keep in mind, where's the light source? Remember, the light's coming from the upper left. So I just want to be mindful of that, so that way that's where I'll add the light. I might add a little bit of this up in the foliage. The reason why is so that we can have some visual harmony, have them relate to one another a little bit. I'm also going to add it down into the cast shadow. Okay. I'm going to take another middle dark value from my selection there and go lightly over the blue. Again, just to make it more interesting. I could make it one color, but then that wouldn't be as interesting. Put it down here. I think I'm going to just darken this foreground just a little bit more, so that so it doesn't just feel like it's falling off a table. And then I'll make the shadow a little bit darker. We'll come back and fix this. And I will be talking to you more about backgrounds. Alright, where are we now? Let us finish up with this vase a little bit. I'm going to go back with the initial blue that I started with and just put it in again. And I'm going to make my marks kind of follow the contour of the, the shape that I'm trying to paint. Now that's too light for that area there, because remember what did we say? That's not where the light is coming from. Uh-oh. So I've got to go back and add a little bit of dark to this one. This is a little bit more involved than painting a landscape, so it's a little bit more going back and forth, I think. Alright, now let's get going with the flowers themselves. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add I'm going to go from dark to light. So what we do is I call this turning on the light. So I start with the darkest color that I see in these flowers. So it's kind of a dark reddish brown. I'm going to start with the dark reddish brown. We can always make them lighter and brighter. So start darker. Alright. And now I'm going to jump to these extra pastels that I had pulled out. So I want to add some orange. And now this is where I'm starting to play with the shapes of the petals, and I'm going to get to a point very quickly where I'm going to decide which ones need to have more refining. That was a little too pale for me, too peachy. So let's go with a little more of a yellow orange. That was a little bit too, I don't know. No, that didn't do it for me. This one's better. And I'm not really worried about the petals being perfect, as I've said. Alright. I'm going to give it, I can tell already that I'm starting to feel the tooth of the paper a little bit, so I'm giving it a quick blast of workable fixative. So that I can get a little bit more with my layers, a little bit more texture in the petals. Okay. Let's see, adding a little bit of a brighter orange. Oops. And then we have to now start to decide which flowers are going to be the star, which are going to be the supporting cast, where are we going to have the most clarity. I'm going to pull some of these petals off so that they fill up this space a little bit. See, this is a little bit of an empty space on the right side, so I'm going to just pull a few petals to give a little interest over there. I don't want to lose my big leaf in here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that guy in a little bit more, give it a little bit of light. And while I have this green out, I'll go ahead and reinforce all of the green foliage within these flowers. A little bit of bits and pieces in there. Add some light to them. And remember, I'm using the same colors that I used for the pears. And I like to do this when I paint. If I paint something, a lot of times I will leave out the palette and I'll reuse them several times. Alright. Now, I'm looking at this just briefly and I say to myself, it looks like someone gave this, the flowers came in with the scissors and just cut off this side. Also feels very heavy in here. So before I go any further, I'm going to take my background color, which was that pale violet, and I'm going to go in there and create some air, some negative space. Just come in with the background and break it up a little bit so that it's not such a dense area. So this is, okay, so this is a landscape technique, right? When we are creating tree holes or sky holes, or, you know, we're going to do the same thing in our still life. We need to create interesting positive space as well as interesting negative space. While I have this in my hand, I'm going to add another layer to the background. I'm adding a layer of pale blue, and remember this is the light side, so I'm going to make this a little bit lighter. And while I'm at it, I might as well add the highlight to the picture. I keep forgetting what I call it. Alright, now it's time to turn on the lights with these sunflowers. This is the fun part. So I'm going to take a warm yellow. This is a yellowy orange. And it's probably a Schminke, could be a Sennelier, but it's a super, super soft pastel. So I'm shouting right now. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing down as hard as I can to get a nice thick textured mark. And I think a lot of times with yellow it's really hard to get the vibrancy. So if you start by putting in darker colors first and then coming with a super soft pastel that you can really, I call this shouting, you really shout it on, you're going to have more luck getting that vibrancy. And it's really frustrating because, as you could see, until I put on this yellow, it wasn't looking like much of anything as far as vibrant flowers, right? So you've got to say to yourself, you know I'm working up to it. I've got to have a little bit of patience because it's going to come and I will get it, but I have to do the bottom layers first, right? You've got to build your foundation to your house before you, sometimes I press so hard that it breaks. And that happens. Build the foundation before you start decorating, and sometimes that's the boring part. Right, if we really want to increase the vibrancy, I'm going to take a cool yellow. This is a lemony yellow. So I'm going to mix the warm and cool together. And this really helps them come alive. But this is where I need to pay attention. I really only want to have clarity where I want your eye to look. So we want to kind of come up into the flowers. So let's just maybe make this one on the edge have a little bit more detail, and then some of these guys right in here, and they lead us to our star, this big flower up in here. And then maybe just make some, oh, that's not a good one at all. Look at how, what is that? Let's get rid of that. So I brush it out, come back with my background color, and that's how you fix it. Oops. That's how you can make corrections. All right, the other thing you can do occasionally, if you really want to get those flowers to be light, is come in with a pale yellow. This is a light yellow, like a lighter value yellow. And sometimes I'll go in and add that just to the tips. It just sometimes really helps it feel like it has that sunlight. If I were to do a pale yellow everywhere though, then it would not feel sunlit. So now we have to work on the centers, and this is the fun part. I'm going to take, let's see if this is the right one. You see all those little dots in there? Oops. I'm going to just go in and do some stippling with the pastel. So basically just making some dots. You can use softer pastels, you can use harder pastels, and take as much time as you want. A lot of times I'll use a variety of the colors in there so that they optically blend together and then they're more interesting. You don't see them in these centers, only really in this one. Now, we need to talk about harmony, right? Color harmony. We have used a lot of purple, so I'm going to put some purple dots in my center. This is just so that we can get everything to relate to one another. I'm going to use this purple just to kind of add a little bit of a harder edge, just to refine that vase a little bit more. And it would be really great if I could add a few bits and pieces of blue. Now a bright cobalt blue would be perfect, but I didn't bring one out. The next thing that I'm going to do, and we're getting to the part of every painting, you know the drill, where you have to stop and evaluate, right, and see where you're at, because when you're on top of it, it's very, very hard to know what else the painting needs. So I'm to the point where I'm going to stop and evaluate, but I'm going to just show you one thing that you can do to a background to make it a little bit more interesting. I'm going to take the color that I used down on the table, and I'm going to just make some linear marks and pull it up into my background. And then I'm going to take, let's see if I have, oh, here's a little green. I'm going to add a little bit of green, because why? There's a lot of green in the subject itself. So what we're doing is we're having the subject talk to the background, and just make a few linear marks, which just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So I'll let this one rest. I may make adjustments. If I do, I'll certainly share those with you. But basically what I wanted to show you in today's demo is start simple. Don't worry about having a perfect drawing, because then you're going to color it in rather than paint. Start using start the side of your pastel, make broad marks, and then gradually add detail and gradually use the brighter and more intense colors. So I hope this has helped. I hope you get some flowers and have fun painting this week. We will move on to other still life subjects later in the month, but this week is Flower Week, and I hope you are going to have a lot of fun, and let's paint.